Juan Mendez Scott's Hologram. Chapter 12. Like a bullet from a gun. Steve and I sat in the backyard of Roxy's mansion, enveloped by the lush greenery and the gentle murmur of a nearby fountain, not far from her crypt. The sun bathed us in warmth, its rays casting a golden glow on our skin as we lounged in plush patio chairs. I savored the crisp, tangy bite of vodka and lemon, while Steve puffed leisurely on a cigar, the smoke curling lazily into the air as he sipped on his own vodka and lemon. We both sat in contemplative silence. I sighed contentedly, breaking the stillness. It's days like this that make all the hard work worth it, Steve, my man. Steve nodded, exhaling a puff of rich, aromatic smoke. Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride, but we did it. A smirk tugged at my lips. And we're just getting started. Can you believe it? We turned Roxy into a hologram and we're making more money than ever before. Generational money, at that. Steve raised his glass. To Roxy and our success. I raised mine in return. To Roxy. The clink of our glasses resonated in the peacefulness of the backyard. Birds chirped merrily, adding to the serene ambience. I glanced at Roxy's tomb, stealing a sip from my drink. I still can't believe she's gone. Steve placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. I know, man. But she's still here with us, in spirit. It's like we can almost hear her singing. I nodded slowly. Yeah, you're right. We sat in silence, lost in our own thoughts. I took a deep breath and looked at Steve with a determined glint in my eyes. You know what? I say we go all out and make a hologram of you next. Steve burst out laughing. Oh, hell no. I can't sing a lick. I can't sing or dance. We both laughed heartily. A hologram of me would only be a comedy show. Still chuckling, I said, I'm just messing with you. We continued to laugh and enjoy our time in the backyard, reveling in the success of the hologram project and the memories of Roxy. I expect to make well over 100 million with Roxy's hologram, I said. God help us, $1 billion. Steve grinned, blowing out a cloud of smoke, clearly pleased with the prospect. We're making beautiful music together, brother, I said. Yes, we are, brother, Steve agreed. Then, Steve's expression shifted, as if he heard something strange. He tilted his head, listening intently. So what are you going to do with all that money, Steve? I asked, studying him closely. Steve kept looking around, his ears perking up. A Ferrari is first on my list. He sat up straight in his chair and leaned forward, straining to hear something in the distance. You all right, man? I asked, growing curious. Steve grinned. You don't hear that? I listened carefully but heard nothing. Hear what, Steve? What are you talking about? Steve gave me a strange look. Then he got up and headed toward the crypt, and I followed him, curious to see what he was talking about. As we approached the crypt, the damp, musty smell of the underground tomb filled our noses. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the stone walls, and the flickering torchlight cast eerie shadows. Steve kneeled down and pressed his ear to the cold, rough surface of the crypt, listening intently. For a split second, it was as if I could hear a faint voice, singing softly from within the crypt. I stood behind Steve, intrigued. I leaned down and pressed my ear to the cold stone, listening carefully. But all I could hear was silence. I shook my head and grinned at Steve. You're not getting spooked, are you, Steve? Now you sound like Stella. Steve smiled, albeit confused. Sounding like Stella? What do you mean? I shook my head, trying not to laugh. Last week. Stella left. Really? Steve asked, feeling bad for me. Got spooked out of her mind. Said she saw Roxy's hologram in the house last week, I explained. What? Steve frowned. Said that the hologram was coming towards her, singing. Steve gave it some thought. That is strange. She wasn't on any drugs or anything, was she? I shook my head, suppressing a laugh. Just wine and some good old heart-pounding sex. We both burst out laughing as we walked back to the patio table to continue getting drunk. Steve stopped and looked at me, curious. Weren't you engaged to Roxy at one time? Waiting for her to get a divorce. I nodded, sipping my drink. Yeah, a divorce she refused to get for some reason, yeah. Steve tried not to laugh. And now you're fucking the sister. I popped off a pompous grin as I finished my drink. I'm afraid so, Steve, my friend. I'm afraid so. Steve broke out laughing, then he finished his drink. I'm gonna grab us a couple more drinks. Cool? Steve handed me his glass. Cool with me. Thanks. I got up and went into the house with our glasses. As I poured the drinks, I suddenly heard the sound of Roxy singing coming from outside. I looked around the room, confused, wondering where the singing was coming from. Then I heard Steve scream and immediately took off running. As I rushed outside, the cool evening air brushed against my skin and the crunch of freshly cut grass echoed under my feet. I saw Steve, standing frozen, his face drained of color, and a look of horror etched on his face. My heart raced as I saw Roxy's hologram walking toward Steve, her ethereal form shimmering in the twilight. Steve looked like he was already dead, with the life sucked out of him, his skin gray, his cheeks hollow, and his eyes burned out of their sockets. He stood there, his body decomposing at an alarming speed, like a bullet from a gun.